You know, one of the most important issues in society, and certainly with my undergraduate students in developmental psychology, are standardized tests. Most of these, my students have no idea, are really intelligence tests. I don't care if they're called SATs, GREs, placement tests, civil service tests, they're IQ tests. They were developed as IQ tests. They have the same statistical structure, but for largely political reasons, we don't call them IQ tests. Rest assured, that's what they are. They all have been validated in a certain way to show that, you know, if you do higher on this, you tend to do a little bit higher on that, like SATs, for example. Are they perfect? No. Are they close to perfect? Not even close. Are other things better predictors? Yes. Achievement is a better predictor. If you take high school grades and you give people the Part 2 SAT, not the aptitude, you know, verbal, quantitative, analytic, but rather the subject test, whatever the subject is, English, history, whatever, that's the best predictor of how well someone will do in college, not the IQ, quote, part of the SAT. But these tests, whether they're civil service, job training, military designations to occupational specialties, they're gatekeepers. They decide who gets in, who doesn't get in. And therein lies the rub. Especially, again, if you come from my kind of background, because the folks that I grew up with weren't the ones that got in. They didn't do well on those kinds of tests. So what you find is that there are all these really interesting examples of where the tests wrongly predict in very gross ways. So I'll just give you one example of the kind of thing that really I find quite compelling. During World War II, because we had great manpower needs in the military, the Army, through Congress, relaxed its standard and let in a lot of what were called Category 4 recruits. These are people who, on IQ-type tests, test borderline retarded. And it was considered bad for morale to have too many of those kinds of people in the battalion. The other soldiers would see that they're kind of slow, they are not as successful making it through basic training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So after World War II, Congress passed a thing saying you can have no more than a certain percent of Category 4s. I think it was 5%. And then in the 1980s, something really amazing happened that nobody comments about, but it's there. And what's there is that there was this massive renorming mistake that was made, where all these men and women who were taking the test, which was an IQ test, even though it wasn't called that, and tested really low. They were Category 4s. You know what happened? The Army mistakenly classified them as Category 1s, as really super intelligent folks. So I thought, isn't that interesting? I wonder how they did. So when you look at how they did in basic training, they went through with flying colors. Their commanding supervisors said, man, we can't get enough of these people. We want a lot more of them. Because they thought they were smarter than what they tested. And I would submit to you, they were smarter than what they tested. It wasn't a fluke. The problem wasn't with the individual, it was with the test and the assumption that the test really reflected native intelligence. The test does reflect some native abilities, but a very small spectrum and very imperfectly. Colleges, I work in a college and I'm also on admissions committees from time to time, and you're faced with this very practical problem. Well, what do you do? You've got students applying from very different high schools. That this student has a 4.0 at this high school taking really challenging courses. This student maybe has a 4.0 from a much weaker high school taking less challenging. So they look at these IQ kinds of tests like SATs as, well, at least we have one common yardstick we can put everyone on. And I think that's the reason for their attractiveness. You feel like it makes it a little bit more objective. Because letters of reference are no good. They're all glowing. Personal experiences and things, there's very little variability that's important for an admissions officer. So it's really high school grades and these test scores. And the high school grades, the lack of comparability ends up putting a whole lot more emphasis. But we can do better, and we should do better. We should say to ourselves, what is it that we're trying to prepare students for? And what are the best measures of those things? So if you're trying to prepare someone to be a university professor, that's something I know something about, then bring the people in. Don't give them an SAT test. Give them a topic and tell them you'll give them a month to prepare a lecture on it. Give them a flawed study and see if they can find a flaw in it. Give them a research question, ask them if they can design a way of testing that research. Do things that you know they're going to have to do if they're going to be a university professor that actually has some relevance to the job, unlike doing, say, analogies.